When I first went to Chicago in 1995, I did some things that were bad. I knew they were bad, but I did them anyway. I stole books. I worked at a bookstore before I started college, and I stole probably 6 books from the bookstore while I worked there. All of the books were in Civil War history. They were by noted Civil War historians. There were at least two different, there's one set of 3 books, and the others were books that were noted and known to be very important as part of the history of the Civil War. But I also went to the Regenstein Library, and I stole a book from the Regenstein Library. It was called Semper Fidelis, The History of the United States Marine Corps. I did this that summer before I started school. There were other books I could have stolen, but those were the only ones that I decided to steal. I knew I hadn't paid for them. I knew that I was supposed to return them. But I said to myself that they're my books. I'm supposed to have them. I didn't have any trepidation. I didn't have any fear, anxiety that something might happen to them. But let me tell you what did happen is by the end of the summer, I had been put in a situation where I had been told that I should be engaging in a particular kind of comportment that I wasn't going to do and that I didn't feel was ethical. I communicated this to somebody who I went to high school with. The records were on a computer disk that was in the boxes with the information I had that was in there, along with my high school diploma, along with some money I had saved up for the beginning of the school year by working, and the books and the clothes. I left town, and when I came back, a person who had made the offer, or rather had the expectation of me engaging with him in the manner that I said I would not, threw everything out. Just threw everything out. I had some people at that time that I knew that agreed to help me go and try to get my stuff back, what was left of it at least. And at the time, the only thing I could get back, because everything else had been thrown out, were those books. All I got back was 1 box of books. There were 2 boxes of books, but I got back 1 box of books. And in that box were the books that I had stolen from my job. Everything else was destroyed somehow, or at least I was told. I actually believe now that it was sold. Why would somebody that was on fellowship after receiving a PhD in a distinguished science program sell a young woman's high school diploma? I don't know. I don't think he had ever encountered a high school diploma like mine. And I think he sold it. I think he sold it in an act of spite that was connected to a network of people that have now been revealed to have been involved with very illegal activity. I mean, people keep dying before they make it to trial and are able to prosecute any crimes. But something's happened, and that option to make sure that those people are dead weight, that just somehow gets categorized some other manner, well, that's done. I also happened to live outside of a bookstore at a time. It was a used bookstore. And periodically, it would go through this process where if it had extra books or if new stock or new books came in, then it would discard books. And so it had a box or boxes outside of the front door, and it would take books that it was no longer going to circulate or sell, and it would leave it in those boxes. And it would leave it there for a couple of days. And so if you walked by, you could go through the free box and get a book. I got over 1,000 books from that free box, right? And most of them were about the history of the former Soviet Union and political struggle around the world. They were nonfiction books. They were nonfiction books. There were other books that they would discard, but I had an interest. And in the time I lived there, I was able to acquire over 1,000 books. At one point I had a library. It was nearly 2,000 books, the history of peoples from all over the world. Most of it was in English. Some of it was first edition writings in English, translations of people from all over the world. Some of it was what you could call propaganda, I suppose, American perspectives on the communist menace. This was part of the library I had, and those books were there along with the books that I stole. Now I'm in Texas, and they have a very, very extensive genealogical library specifically regarding pension rolls from people that fought in the Civil War. It seems to be very important. Regardless of what other changes take place, those specific books seem to be very important when it comes to the collateral that's used for public financing. You can get access to that online, or at least the registries of that online now. There's other books you can't. They're gone. Did their employees steal them and keep them for themselves? I don't know if that's the case. I think it's one of these things where they want to think of it as some sort of collector item, that they'll keep it for a while, and after it's taken out of public circulation, which is exactly what they're doing, well, then they might be able to sell it for a nice markup to a collector or a antiquities dealer. They're making us, some of us, cultural property, and allowing certain people to have private access. And this has been planned. This has been planned at least since the 90s. It's been planned since at least I was below the age of consent. I don't have those books anymore. At some point in time, things changed. I ended up giving those books to a parish, people that came from a variety of political and spiritual backgrounds, but by and large, people that were at least connected to a struggle that was similar to that history in the part of the world they came from. When they would talk about where they came from and who was important to their community, it would oftentimes be people that were referenced in those other books. Those other books and what those people talked about, their understanding of the history, of the important moments, of the things that let them know that they were connected to something elsewhere, were referenced insofar as they knew whatever it was they knew about other parts of the world. They referenced the sort of events and the time frames that the people I was among had lived through and lived with as part of their history and their culture. Those books are gone, and so are those people. I tried to return to Chicago years after I left. Where are those records? I mean, I followed the contract bids, including the contract bids outside of the country. There's a whole process of contract bidding in the United States. A couple years later, those contracts end up getting bid for another country. Where are the books? Where are the people? Right? It's very, very, very important matter. It's very easy. It's very easy to find certain things these days. Other things are not as easy. When I came to Dallas, there was that day issued a $300.4 million municipal bond that, among other things, would have included the public library system as part of the public facilities that would have been connected to the general obligations that bond financed. There was absolutely nothing legitimate about calling in books so they could be destroyed at a specific period of time as part of somebody else's write-off. Using some leverage they were able to wield at City Hall to cull the people and our cultural property to offset somebody else's losses. That bond should not have been allowed to be maintained. And the later bonds that were set up for this city should not have been allowed to have been put as an obligation upon the people until they addressed the implications of the fraud in 2018. It would now appear there is substantial evidence that they had every intention of defrauding whoever it was that purchased those securities, but especially whoever it was they used as collateral on those securities. You're going to have us all gather together and be counted, be registered, be monitored for our electronic account usage at your facilities to determine there's what? A price point on every visit? And then that price point somehow is registering as cost or revenue that justifies salaries for people that work there in a building that the city leases. And then that will be used to justify obligating the entire public to hundreds of millions of dollars, so that before, by the way, the third anniversary of that $300 million bond, you've just destroyed what percentage of the actual tangible property that was used in the underwriting on that $300 million bond to begin with. How much more cultural property do you need to dispose of to cover up for that fraud? This is an important question. Why? Nobody answered me yesterday. There was a deadline yesterday regarding public education. Nobody responded.